December 11th, 1990. My name is Max Nichols. I'm doing this interview with Admiral William C. Trout, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and now a professor at the University of Oklahoma. I'm doing this interview for a column for the Journal Record newspaper, which I do regularly in Oklahoma City, as well as for the Oklahoma Historical Society. So now we begin. Thank you. I'm with the Journal Record, which I think you may know is a local business newspaper. We reach 20,000 primary business people who are leaders, and a lot of what you teach here and a lot of your career is leadership, and so that's what I wanted to concentrate on, rather than just one more interview on what's happening in the Middle East or the military situation. And I did submit some questions. I don't know if you've ever got a chance.
I haven't had an opportunity to really look at it.
Okay. Well, basically, the way they work is, what I kind of wanted to do, if I could, is go through your career a little bit and kind of look at what you learned and where you learned it, who you learned it from, in terms of how to lead, going back to when you went into the Navy. I have found quite often that people grow in leadership according to the kinds of things the people they're around and the things they do, and some of the people who work for them. Yeah. And I was a sports writer for 25 years. Got to work with Bud Wilkinson here, then Bud Grant in Minnesota. I was a sports editor at the Minneapolis Star for 10 years. Yes, sir. I traveled with the Twins for 10 years. And then I was a sports editor at the Minneapolis Star, so I worked for the Vikings. And I worked with Lou Little at Columbia University years ago, when President Eisenhower was there, as a matter of fact. So I've paid a lot of attention to how people lead and where they learn, what they learn, and so would you mind going through something like that?
No, I don't.
Basically, that's what these questions were about.
Yes.
Were going back to when you got into the Navy and as you came up in the Navy, people you learned important things from, things that stayed with you about leadership and motivating people. Because I know that in the Navy, even though you can give orders, you still have to motivate people.
That's right.
I was in the Army.
That's one of the great misunderstandings that people have about the military. They think that being a hierarchical organization and very authoritarian, or at least that's the general impression of it, very authoritarian. But the problem of leadership is not as great as it would be in other venues, but I don't think that's true. Particularly not true in today's military.
Yeah, it was different when you came in, wasn't it? Back
Yes,
in the
it was.
40s.
And of course, the facts of the matter are that when you're in an all-volunteer military, first of all, people have a choice whether they're going to be in the military or not. And if you want people to re-enlist, if you want people to stay for a career, which is the heart of a really professional military, they have some say about their living conditions, the quality of life they want and expect, and the kind of leadership that they think they have a right to. But even more than that, in today's world, you're talking to a very highly educated segment of our population. A lot of people in the military are very highly educated.
Yes.
And we now, of course, our recruitment has been good enough. We don't take anybody that is not at least a high school graduate, and many more than that. And lastly, we live in a first of all, educated people cannot be driven.
Yes.
They've got to be led, and they've got to know why they're doing something. And they expect their leaders to be enlightened. They don't expect their leaders to be autocratic. And they expect their leaders to share with them the mission and what we're achieving, and they expect their leaders to participate with them. Also, we now live in a very pluralistic society.
Yes.
And that has also influenced the military. I mean, just because people join the military, they don't give up that birthright or that custom. The military is just as much a part of the society as anything else is. We are not separate and distinct from the society. And these attitudes that prevail throughout the country prevail in the military.
My son, by the way, is a master sergeant in the Air Force.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, he chose that and is quite successful. He's up at KI Sawyer Air Force Base right now.
I know where that is.
In Michigan.
Yeah.
Gets a lot of snow.
I've been there.
Have you?
Cold part of the world.
Yeah.
All of these things impact on the military. And in the 45 years that I was in the military, I watched leadership evolve.
What was it like when you started? And were there any people who made strong impressions on you when you started? Important to you? Did you start as you started as lieutenant? You came out of the academy.
I was here for a year at Oklahoma University, and then I went to the Naval Academy.
Yeah.
And I came out of the Naval Academy in 1946.
Mm-hmm.
And I was an ensign.
Ensign, okay.
Starting in 1946. But of course, the Naval Academy puts great emphasis on leadership. When I was a student there, I don't think that they were, certainly the part of the curriculum that was devoted to leadership was not very sophisticated. But the fact remains that you are steeped in naval history, and they put great emphasis on that. You are surrounded, of course, while you were a student, by memorials, monuments, examples of battles and history and men that led the Navy in past years. And as a plebe, you're expected to learn a great deal about them and to...
Did you dream of a long-term military career?
Yes, I wanted to be in the Navy from the time I was about 8 years old.
Okay. Like that. I made that kind of determination for my career, too, early. I understand that.
And not everybody took me very seriously until I was 15 or 16. But I wanted to be in the Navy, and I read everything I could get my hands on.
Oh, let's see.
Starting with the book Annapolis Today. That was the first book.
That was the first book. Were there any people at the Academy or in your early years that made a strong impression, that left things with you that you still use?
I used, of course, a lot of the things I learned at the Naval Academy, just in dealing with people. When they try and put you in leadership situations, even as a student. They rotated all the time as to who would head the formation, who would be the section leader of the class, who would be responsible for certain. I have fond memories of some of my duty officers, but most of those memories were adversarial. The students against the duty officers. What I do remember, of course, is that the Naval Academy attempts, and I think with some success, if for no other reason than redundancy, to imbue a strong sense of duty in you, that if you are charged to do something, you do it. And if you don't do it, you suffer the consequences. And that was sort of part of the game there, and that you were not being put upon because you were penalized for not doing something. That was a rule of life, and that's a rule of life in the Navy. And if it was inconvenient or you had to get up early, that's just too bad. That's the way it was. And in that regard, I think the Naval Academy Regimen was, first of all, important and secondly, successful. Of course, people often overlook the fundamental mission of the Naval Academy. It's an educational institution, but frankly, its fundamental mission is not a broad education. Its fundamental mission is to prepare people to serve and please. That's first and foremost. And while it's nice to broaden your education and to learn other things, you must come out of there with enough knowledge that you can actually serve in the Navy. That means that sometimes your education is slighted in other respects. And often the main Naval Academy was criticized for that, but people that criticized it sort of either neglected or didn't think it was important, the fundamental mission. And so any kind of, to improve the educational curriculum of the Naval Academy has had to still preserve that fundamental mission. And that's required a lot of imagination and a lot of innovativeness on the part of people a structure.
You find the idea in beyond the academy and in your career since then has changed very much about this business of duty. That is traditionally, for hundreds of years, with many countries, one of the big, most important parts of serving in the military. And I remember feeling it in the Army, you know, even as a draftee.
Well, I don't think,
Is it still there?
yes, I think it is, but things have changed. I
Mhm.
mean, I would never pretend that, of course, the world has changed.
Yes.
The country has changed.
That's what I mean, the society.
And society has changed. And the Navy, as I said earlier, is not insulated totally from that. On the other hand, the concept of duty, I think, has changed. I have been taught from early years, and I still subscribe to the fact that you have a right to, or I shouldn't say it, if you do not subscribe to the policy or to your orders or to what you're being directed to do, then you should leave the Navy. And then you have a right to express yourself in any way that you wish. But the fact remains that there is a much more input from bottom to top now than there
Are
used
there?
to be. And that people do express themselves more freely, and if they object to what they're being ordered to do, they will, in many cases, speak up. Now, the way that is handled in the Navy is you have a right to object or to express dissent, or at least let your view be known, but once the decision is made, then you must carry it out. And you must carry it out with vigor and skill, not just haphazardly or apathetically. I
Yeah.
still subscribe to that.
I even follow that in an interview.
On the other hand, the real challenge in the Navy, and I say in the Navy and all the military, because the last 10, 15 years of my life, I was not in the Navy, I was in the military.
Yes,
I
that's
had all
right.
the services. And it's a challenge throughout the service, and you don't really begin to see the significance of it until you get to the senior ranks. The tough part of military life is to have a man that will do what you want him to do, but doesn't lose his ability to think independently and is not intimidated enough to not say when he disagrees. And that is really hard to produce a military officer that can survive the system and then get to military high rank and be a free-thinking man.
That's hard in business, and it would be more harder in the military because
I consider it the number one challenge. And I see it right now in my retired life. People say that because I was a career military man, that I must agree with everything the military is doing, that I must support my president. Well, I don't necessarily agree with that.
Yeah. And you've taken a stand publicly.
I've done it a number of times since I retired. But there are many people that object to me doing that.
So that you hear about that thing.
Oh my.
Yeah.
I hear from the retired community, I hear from the active community, I hear from but I don't, I heard an interesting thought expressed the other day by a Vietnamese man. And I served with him in Vietnam, and we were talking about this. And I said, well, it's tough because when I take these stands, some of my friends, my old friends, my military friends, say that's wrong. And he said, it's not only not right, he said, it is your duty to express your view, even though it's contrary. That was the way he looked at it. He said, you have a duty if you feel that way to express a contrary view.
You don't do anybody a service just yesing people. Nobody who ever worked for you did you a service doing that.
And it is hard, as being a leader, to encourage people to tolerate a free exchange of views among the people that work for you.
I used to argue.
Some men can't do it.
No. I used to argue in a simple thing like my newspaper. I told Dan Hogan when I went to work for him that I am an outspoken guy. I've got a reputation for it. I even tend to speak loudly sometimes. But I do you no service by sitting there silently when I know that I feel differently.
I strongly agree with
Yeah,
that.
you know, it's hard.
And,
Hard to
but in the military,
people to-
particularly if you've been in that mode
Oh,
for 40
yeah.
years,
Well,
you
yeah.
kill that.
Uh-huh.
And what happens, of course, with mediocre leaders, if men speak up and they don't like it, they make sure those guys don't get promoted.
Mhm.
And they are doing a disservice to the military.
Sure. That's right. Were there people along the way who were important to you in learning these things?
I think probably. First of all, I read all the time.
Mhm.
I've read all my life.
Yeah.
And I don't confine myself to, but I primarily read history and biography.
Yeah, I do too.
And there are men that I have historically sort of become identified with, believe it or not, in my mind.
Yes.
Men that I admire. I don't have many, but I admire Robert E. Lee. I'm a tremendous admirer of Robert E. Lee.
Who took a real tough stand.
I studied Civil War for a long time in my earlier life. My naval heroes are sort of few. I of course, read a great deal about Nelson. I find him a most intriguing man. In the American military, or American Navy, the man I admired the most, from what little I know about him, was Spruan. Admiral Spruan, World War II. S-P-R-U-A-N-C-E. He was one of Nimitz' fleet commanders.
I see.
I was a strong admirer of Spruan, still am. I don't have too many American naval people that I have become, and this is a little controversial, I have become a strong admirer of Kemal Ataturk.
Who?
Kemal Ataturk. When I was serving in the southern Mediterranean as the commander of the NATO Southern Flank, I had Turkish forces under my command, and I became quite intrigued with Turkish history, and especially Kemal Ataturk.
Did he work with you there?
No.
Oh, he's historical then.
Kemal Ataturk was the man that overthrew the Sultan
I see.
in 1920
Ended the Ottoman Empire.
and ended the Ottoman Empire and westernized Turkey. And he died in 1936, I think, or 38, something like that, right in that period of time. And then someone asked me about this, and I said I thought the greatest military man of this century was Kemal Ataturk. And that was published in Time magazine, and I received a world of mail on it. I received a lot of mail from Americans saying, "Who is Kemal Ataturk?"
Yeah.
And I received a lot of mail from Turks saying, "Who worship Ataturk?" He's one of the few dictators of the 1930s that still worships in his own country. And I received all kinds of Turkish mail saying, "We really appreciate it because we agree with you." And I received a lot of hate mail from Greeks who detested Kemal Ataturk because he defeated the Greeks in Turkey. And
What was it you admired about him?
that he was able to achieve so much militarily with so few resources.
I see.
You know, I've seen a lot of great military men in my lifetime, but all of ours had a great deal to work with.
Yeah.
Kemal Ataturk had nothing. He had a poor country. He had to create his own defense industry. He had to build an army after the Ottoman Empire disappeared. And he had to provide the political leadership of the army as well as the military leadership. And he expelled the Greeks from Turkey, and militarily he stood off. They never fought, but he stood off the British and the French, who were occupying Turkey. And, of course, the number one military achievement of his life, he was the commander that defeated the British at Gallipoli. And Moorhead says of him, and very few times in the history of the world, in a major battle, has one man been so instrumental. That Kemal Ataturk was in the Battle of Gallipoli. And it was essentially a third world country defeating a modern power. He was a marvelous military man. He was a very cruel man. He was a very firm man. And He's also been turned into a statesman. He was the first president of Turkey and ruled Turkey as president for 20 years. And just an amazing thing.
I think I saw a movie on it one time, and I had not read it.
He eliminated the Arabic language in Turkey and turned them to another language. He freed the women in Turkey. He cast out the fads. He just changed the society and culture. Very few people can do that. He's a marvelously strong man. Wide-ranging man. But anyway, I admire Lord Wellington. I think Wellington was one of the greatest soldiers that ever lived.
Fought the French for so many years.
Yes. That part of his life is sort of ignored in the United States. Everybody thinks of Waterloo.
Yeah.
Nobody thinks of the campaigns that Wellington waged for many years before Waterloo. I admire Marshal Zhukov in Russia. Very, very great soldier.
And he's your friend, isn't he?
No, Zhukov was the World War II marshal.
Where's World War II marshal?
Yeah. But I learned a lot about Zhukov from my friend, Ackerman. He told me a lot about Zhukov.
Your friend's name was
Ackerman. When I was growing up in the Navy, I served with, of course, your center of your life, the shipboard is the commanding officer.
Really?
And,
Bush was commanding officer?
no, I said the
the center of anybody's life, yes, when you're there.
And I had a couple of commanding officers I thought were really superb. A man by the name of Clark was my first commanding officer on the destroyer. And to watch him lead men was really
Remember his first name?
Asa, A-S-A.
C-L-A-R-K, or K-E.
Okay. I guess he did have an E on it. Had an E on it. His initials were A.A. and his close friends called him A-Square. That was the name from the Naval Academy. But he was a great shipboard leader and had a way with men that was absolutely marvelous. I served on the submarine with a man by the name of Griffith, who I think was probably the best skipper I ever served with. Later was a vice admiral in the Navy.
What was his first name?
Charles.
Charles Griffith, I-T-H-S.
And he's still in Washington. I see Chuck quite often. He and I served together, not directly, but sort of together many years off and on.
He was a great skipper, though. He was in control.
Commanding officer.
Yeah.
He was really good.
He walked the line of caring for his men as well as running things.
He was just good. And he could tolerate dissent, and he encouraged people to speak up. And he was very confident and very, I'd say he was the best captain I served.
Well, do you think that under people like that you begin to develop your views of
I don't think
accepting
any question about it.
Okay, yeah.
And of course you watch your contemporaries. I served with so many wonderful contemporaries over the years. I learned a great deal from them about how you treat people, men, up and down. There are a couple of levels of leadership, though. Not all leadership is the same. And that's, in the first place, the styles of individuals change greatly. I mean, two men can lead the same body of men, and they'll do it completely different.
Sure.
Matter of fact, the Navy tried at the end of World War II to they collected a group of, I forget how many, 50 or 60 of their most successful submarine commanders, and tried to determine what they had in common. And they failed absolutely miserably. Couldn't isolate any. The only thing they had in common is they were very good with spatial relations. Well, that's obvious because the submarine fire control problem was a spatial relations problem. So anybody that successfully shoot torpedoes must be good at spatial relations. That's the ability to see moving and problems and so forth. But that doesn't say a damn thing about leadership. And the leadership traits, they just couldn't find any common threads. Everybody was so different. It was infinite.
Well, I can remember even when I was in the Army, when you had a CO change, they often quite made a definite step to establish their own pattern.
Well, that's a technique for
Yes.
to make sure that people has your stamp on it. Of course, you've seen Bush do that in his presidency.
Yes.
He was terribly worried about being accused of Reagan.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Another Reagan, and just taking over Reagan. He didn't want that. He wanted to erase the Reagan image and establish his own. And I think most leaders have something like that. Although I've seen some that didn't bother to do that were very good. They just had enough confidence that they just, if the organization was running well, they just grabbed it as it was and marched on.
You started to say there were two levels of leadership.
Well, I think there may be more, but there's certainly two. In my life, I was. For example, if you, naval officers, and this is a gross generalization, but our lives were to cycle back and forth, at least mine was, between going to sea and Washington. And in Washington, you were in staff positions. You were usually working for a very high-ranking officer, and you had working under you officers, not enlisted people. But you would say, as a captain, you would have working for you 4 or 5 commanders and maybe a dozen lieutenant commanders.
Yeah.
Who were doing planning and so forth and so forth.
Yeah.
And your boss would be a 3- or 4-star admiral. And leading those men and the kinds of things that were admired in the Pentagon in those offices were completely different than the things out at sea, where you're leading a crew and the things they admire. They admire a man of decisiveness with maneuvering his ship and taking it into a courageous situation and so forth, and a man that could get along at the same time with his crew and be earthy and not intimidated by the rigors or the deprivations of going to sea. In the Pentagon, what is admired is a man of very, very quick mind who can write, who can do these papers, who can go up and give a briefing and express himself, both in writing or orally. And one of the interesting things about a huge staff organization, you learn very quickly that I don't care how bright you are, if you can't express yourself, nobody's ever going to know you're bright.
Yeah.
You can't just rush into the admiral and say, oh, last night I had a good idea and here it is. That's not the way it works.
Yeah.
If you've got a good idea and you're going to get it to the top, you've got to be able to put it on a piece of paper, send it through a long ladder, and your paper's got to be written well enough people listen to it. And if you can't do that, I don't care how smart you are. It won't work. They also learn worse than to admire moral courage. The kinds of things we're talking about right now. People that will go in and say to the boss, look, you're wrong. Now that's not admired near as much as sea. They just don't have that problem. But in the higher levels of the military, that's a tremendous problem.
So going back and forth really helped you then, developing for the responsibility you were eventually going to have to carry.
Very much so. I did half my life in Washington. Now that's a little unusual to me. My wife and I spent half our married life in Washington. I didn't seem to be able to get away from Washington. Every time I left the ship or leaving the field, I came back to Washington.
Did you enjoy duty in the field?
Well, enjoy the
life in the, when you had to go to sea?
Oh yeah, I always enjoyed that. I enjoyed I did a year in Bahrain in the Persian Gulf as the commander of Middle East Force, and we were anticipating 2 years. And I got ordered back to Washington by surprise at the end of the year, even though it was a promotion. And my wife sat down and cried. She said, I just don't want to go back there. We're enjoying life here so we have such a wonderful life, and here you got to go back. And if people think, oh my, you must have been glad to get out of Bahrain. But it wasn't that way at all. We loved Bahrain. Still do for that matter. But the ability to lead in Washington is different.
You were, was the problem of handling the Gulf crisis at the time you were chairman, the bringing of the ships in was that the the biggest responsibilities that you had?
Well, that was certainly the biggest operational responsibility.
Yeah.
I think in looking back on my 4 years, probably the biggest, most important thing I did as chairman was initiate or inaugurate the transformation to Goldwater Nichols. I don't mean initiate the legislation, but after the legislation was passed, the responsibility fell on me to implement the legislation. And it was a dramatic change in the way that.
What is the most important change that's come out of that? I'm sorry.
Well, that's the Goldwater Nichols was a reorganization of the Defense Department. And from where I sat, the biggest change was to Goldwater Nichols. I don't mean initiate the legislation, but after the legislation was passed, the responsibility fell on me to implement the legislation. And it was a dramatic change in the way that.
What is the most important change that's come out of that? I'm sorry.
Well, that's the Goldwater Nichols was a reorganization of the Defense Department. And from where I sat, the biggest change was that I became the personal military advisor to the President and Secretary.
Oh, yeah.
And we no longer rendered advice as a corporation or as corporate advice. The chairman consulted with his chiefs, but he gave his advice.
Yes.
And
rather than a collective.
that is right.
Yeah.
And there had been,
I have read about that.
the collective pattern had been there so long. This was an extremely sensitive and delicate situation because the chiefs were, in a sense, giving up a lot of their authority to the individual chiefs of service, and they weren't particularly happy about it.
By the way, I interviewed General Merritt one time before, while he was still
He was the
on
director
the staff.
of the
Yeah. Yeah, he, of course, he went here.
That was before Goldwater.
Yes, yes, I understand that. He went to NATO from there.
He went to Oklahoma University School, native of law.
Yeah. Yeah, I really enjoyed that interview.
He was a great
Good man, he's still
really
there.
liked Jack.
Is he still NATO? Yeah.
No, he's retired.
Is he
He's
retired?
the head of the, or executive head of the Association of U.S. Army.
I wanted to ask you, was there anybody that ever worked under you that you ever learned from?
Oh, yeah, all the time. Well, I can give you a long
Lot
list
of
of those. No, it's fascinating to watch people that work for you.
Yeah, I have found that personally. I've managed for 16 years, so I've enjoyed watching people grow under me.
Succeed and watch them fail.
Yeah.
And to watch them gamble.
Yeah. So I always placed myself, you know, I always went with them. And when I put somebody in a position, I always wanted them to make it. And quite often, I nominate even the guy that succeeded me as editor of Journal Record, a guy who had to grow into the job. And I was sure he would do it.
Yeah.
But seeing it happen, a wonderful thing.
There's very few people step into jobs that they're already mastered.
That's right.
That's
right. You usually have to grow into it.
But people are very good at going into jobs. They're better than you think they're going to be.
I know. I took over sports staff in Minnesota. I mean, I was the youngest guy by 20 years. Everybody had 20 years of seniority because of the gap they had in there. And it's just a curious circumstances. Getting the respect of those guys, really a big thing in my life. And I got that done. I really felt good about that.
Well, I had a number of senior officers I worked for that I watched them, both good and bad, operate.
Yeah.
Influenced me. And, I watched a vice chief of naval operations by the name of Claude Ricketts.
Well, that's pretty cool.
Who I was tremendous admirer. He was one of the few admirals I ever knew that I didn't think he'd ever make admiral. He was too nice a guy. He was a marvelous man. Very, very bright. I had a mentor by the name of Wynell. His nickname was Blackie Wynell, an admiral I worked for. He taught me an awful lot about He told me once, this is very un-Navy, this is not the standard Navy pattern. He told me once to always appear to be less than you are.
Do you remember that when you're going into such situations?
Sure do. And he was a farm boy from Illinois, and he went to great efforts to appear that he was a farm boy. But he wasn't a farm boy at all. He was really sharp. He was a magnificent mind.
Gives you a distinct advantage if people underestimate you a little bit.
And then they're never disappointed. I mean, the standard Navy pattern is to run around looking like you're more than you are. Never fail. Never always be on top of things. Always be in command. So forth and so forth. And a lot of guys can do that, never knowing what the hell they're doing. And they often get promoted that way. And you just irritate the devil out of me.
You've had to deal with corporate world a great deal in your life too, because the Navy does work with the corporate world.
Well, I don't know that I did. No, I never did. The procurement side of the Navy, but I was never in the acquisition, the procurement, or the research side of the Navy.
Well, maybe I can see. I've known the guys who commanded Tinker, almost every one of them.
See, they're very heavily
and they're really hip on what's going on in the corporate world.
I was mostly in the plans and policy area. I had an awful lot to do with the political side of our government all my life.
Because of the time in what?
In fact, as a lieutenant, I did it during the White House. As the naval aide to the president. And that was my first real brush with
what president?
Eisenhower. And I had a succession of jobs where I was in political foreign policy, political military. But I've had more to do with the corporate world per se directly in the last year than I have in my whole life.
The reason I brought it up is because I was going to ask if you're finding parallels or great difference.
Oh, I think there's great parallels. I have attempted, though, in the last year to stay in industry that doesn't have a direct defense connection. I have tried to stay away from it.
Have you really? That rather than take advantage in any way.
Of course, it turns out to be a pretty good idea right now because defense industry is really
I've
been asked to be on a number of boards, military aircraft producers, but I just couldn't. I have not done that yet. I don't intend to yet.
What kind of company? What company are you dealing with?
Well, I'm on 4 boards.
Oh, yeah?
I'm on Merrill Lynch, Texaco, and Pfizer, and Norfolk and Southern.
Well, that's a good diversity, too.
But none of them do direct defense business. Texaco sells oil.
What kind of parallels do you see?
Oh, I think they're great parallels. They have the same leadership problems. They have the same.
People are people, after all.
Promotion problems, administrative problems, and leadership problems.
Well, when you teach leadership, and that's a good deal of what you teach here, is that, isn't it?
Well,
Comes down to that.
Certainly trying to teach them how to work inside the government framework.
Yeah. What do you teach? What's your appropriate approach?
Well, I try and stay mainly with principles and then illustrate the principles by actual cases. I think that's what, not exactly what you call a case study, of course, but in a sense it is. I use a lot of parallels in my teaching. When you refer to the Persian Gulf convoy operation, the little fight we had to get that going in the opposition, for instance, was support for the Americans. And how the countries come into the act, and how other branches of the government come into the act. What kinds of clashes occur, and the media's role.
Yep. They all play a part in it.
Yeah, they do.
And you did get support for that operation, didn't you?
We had a lot of opposition originally.
Yeah.
But when it was over, why, it was, I think, almost universally claimed the success. It worked the way we had hoped it would. But we got a lot of static. Got beat up pretty bad when we were contemplating doing it. But Congress never voted on it. See, now the same problem's coming up now. Congress has got its opinions, but they don't have any guts. They will never come down one side or the other. Now, but they don't come down on the president for this Iraqi commitment. When they knew Congress comes into session, they'll debate it, and they'll hear a clash of opinions. A lot of people against it, a lot of people for it. But the Congress, I bet, doesn't put its money where its mouth is.
That's a real problem in this kind of thing. That's where you say it. You need the country committed ahead of time. But boy, it's easy to stand back there and criticize, take those stands.
The one thing we did on the first Gulf convoy operation, which is very, very important and is not there now, is that I strongly believe that as long as we can keep military action at sea or in the air, that we could prevail at small cost.
As long as you didn't have to get on the ground.
Yeah, particularly the Iranian army and et cetera, et cetera. But you see, we don't have that now.
Yeah.
We're on the ground now. We're not only on the ground, we're up against probably the number one, militarily speaking, the number one third country in the world. And the chances of real grief were much, much higher. I really wasn't afraid of the Iranians or anybody else at sea. We could handle it. Although there were things they could have done more of, they didn't. But they're not seamen, they're not mariners. And I knew that. I lived in that part of the world. And they're not airmen either. We're much, much more at home in the air than they are.
Those kind of things really come to bear, don't they? I always felt that, President, it's hard to find in history where you jungle people in their own jungle, mountain people in their own mountains, and desert people in their own desert. I mean, really beat them. You can win battles, but it's hard to do those things.
We're going to find that out.
Yeah, it's hard to do those things. I mean, the Russians couldn't beat the Afghanistan.
Of course, the current problem is it's unique in one respect. But I can't remember my experience of a war where we had an opportunity to discuss it before we got in it. We usually fight and then think later. And here people are trying to get the president to do a little thinking before he starts fighting.
Yeah.
Well, he needs to get the president to think, I'll tell you.
Well, you talking about this president or any president? Any president. Yeah.
Don't put that.
Okay. Well, they have to, they're so busy from reacting politically.
Well, that's correct.
You know.
And he doesn't have the luxury of great thought sometimes. When he first threw those troops into Saudi Arabia, you know, the conventional wisdom was that Saddam was going to strike for the Saudi oil, because I don't think it was right, but the fact was that many people, and we couldn't afford to take a chance that he wasn't.
Yeah.
So the president had to act, and I was all for that, still
I
am.
was too.
But now we have an opportunity before waging war here to really think about what we're doing. And
I know that's a little strange, in that surprise always was such a big part of warfare that I find it strange to sit people debating in the media.
well, it's strange to see him on TV,
Yeah.
Saddam Hussein, and our president's on their TV every night. Peter Jennings is in Baghdad.
Yeah.
How can you go to war with a country you're wandering around the country? And it's just, it's almost unique in our experience, you know. It's almost as if you can't go to war as long as you televise somebody. It's crazy. But the fact remains that...
and maybe that's good. Maybe that'll keep us out of war.
Maybe it will.
You know, maybe that will. I mean, maybe that's what it takes. I found myself very surprised when Bush turned around and said, well, he's going to talk now. Because it seemed to me that what he was doing was going back and forth to keep Hussein off balance. And at the same time, trying to build up to go when he wanted to go, which is during the winter, I guess. Hussein obviously wants to delay the thing till March, and then he knows they're never going to come.
Well, I don't know if that's true. The desert's neutral. It hampers us, it hampers him. And, I think we can fight any time we want to, after we've been there a while. We couldn't the day we arrived. My son's alive.
Is it?
And I get letters from him and talk to him on the phone. And they're just getting better at it every day. So our condition is improved. He said I was drinking a quart an hour, now I'm drinking 2 quarts a day.
Really?
And,
So they're becoming conditioned to the desert?
They're
I
improving
thought
in every
about that.
respect.
I thought the desert was an enemy, basically.
Well, it looks like
But you
they're
said
not
it's
used
neutral.
to it.
Yeah.
But after they live there a while, it won't be. That's one of the great advantages of time. And the navigation problem. The navigation problem is really frustrating them, and now they're whipping it.
Navigation?
Well, navigating in the desert.
In the desert.
Well,
Oh, I see.
American deserts, which they train in, are more discreet. I mean, they have hills, they have landmarks. That desert doesn't have anything.
Yeah.
And,
It's like operating in the ocean.
yeah, dunes are there today, and tomorrow they're gone.
Mm-hmm.
But they're getting where they can do it. And, he's a company commander over there in the Marine Corps. And,
What's his name? Blank.
he's much more
Is he a captain? Or is he a
captain of the Marine Corps.
Captain of the
Rifle company. Right up on the border of
He's
Kuwait.
a CO. Are they? He's on the border.
200 men up there.
Boy.
They call his battalion the speed bump.
Does he worry about your outspoken, the fact that
Well, that's a
is
very
that a
good
problem for
question.
him?
I've written him some letters and sent him my speeches,
Mm-hmm.
and he always asks me about it. But whether it's a problem for him or not, I don't know. I don't think he totally agrees with me. He's ready to fight.
He is. And your position has been...
I shouldn't say I'm not ready to fight. That's not true.
No, but...
My position is let's give the embargo a fair shot.
Mm-hmm.
And if it doesn't work, we'll get him. And I want him out of Kuwait. I just want him out of Kuwait as bad as anybody does.
Oh, yeah. Well,
on the other hand, I want to achieve whatever we're going to achieve at a minimum cost. These extreme objectives people are coming up with now, they're just some people spoiled for a fight. And if one thing goes away, they're going to find another.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And they just don't like Saddam.
I spent a lot of time out in eastern Oklahoma. That you follow where my brother and mother live. And boy, you ought to talk to people. They think you just go in there and, just... Yeah, it's that easy.
But, just like in Saddam Hussein, I don't consider that a national interest. There are a lot of people I don't like around.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
A lot of people kill more people than Saddam Hussein has. That guy in Cambodia has killed, God almighty.
Yeah.
And look what China did to its people. I don't hear anybody wanting to attack China.
Yeah, you can't go into them on that basis.
And I don't think that just like Saddam Hussein is a national interest, and I don't think proving George Bush is not a wimp is a national interest.
Yeah.
Those things are just emotional, and who cares about those things?
Yeah, what you got to set out what we really want to achieve.
Yeah, that's right. That's what's really important to us. And these people that are advising us, a lot of them are just doing it for Israel's sake, or for the royal family's sake. Yeah. They're not worried about American interests. They're worried about some problem the Israelis have got. That's the Israeli problem. That isn't our problem.
And he has been criticized for not really establishing what we're trying to get down there.
Well, when I speak around the country, somebody always stands up and says, Admiral, I hear all this. I just don't think it's that important. Nobody has persuaded me that it's that important. Now, this isn't an ethical business. I mean, of course, Hussein's an evil man.
Yeah.
Although he isn't dumb. He isn't irrational. He's an evil man, and our cause is just, but so what?
Yeah.
There are a lot of just causes around the world, and we're not throwing our bodies across railroad tracks.
Yeah, we're certainly not standing up for democracy,
There are a lot of Irish pennants. There's an Irish pennant in the Navy's things hanging out.
Is that right?
This commitment's got Irish pennants all over it. About 40 or 50% of your people don't agree with us on this thing.
It would seem to me that, back to one thing we brought up, and it comes up, is the embargo, that the longer we wait, if he can't, the harder it's going to be to supply the military, whether he can supply the people and all those other, it's fine.
The military's already selling.
But it would seem to me that would get harder and harder and harder.
tremendous article in the New York Times, not New York Times, the Washington Post Sunday about embargoes. A group of academics has did a study on 117 embargoes in this century. And it's the most enlightening article on embargoes I've seen it. And it isn't Jim Baker, and it isn't Dick Cheney, and it isn't Bill Crowe. Just musing on the goddamn problem. These are people who have actually looked at it. And embargoes are a hell of a lot more effective than everybody thinks they are. The reason I don't think embargoes are effective is that they don't throw an embargo on, the guy immediately gets down on his knees and says, please don't hurt me. They don't do it that way. But embargoes work. And of all those 117, this is the tightest embargo of the bunch.
Yeah, because more countries have joined. I mean, that's one of the problems with debates.
You never debate the facts. You just debate a bunch of emotional opinions. The politicians don't want the facts in there. Very frustrating to academics, the way politicians do their business.
Well, frustrating to military, too.
Well, yeah, to anybody that's really familiar
Trying to get a
with,
job.
As I testified the other day, one of the biggest problems I had when I was chairman was when we got ready to do something militarily is to get a politician to tell me what the specific objective was. They usually say something like, well, we want to go get him, or we want to beat him, or we want to win. But, you know, I haven't heard yet what anybody wants to do in Iraq. All these people that want to attack, what exactly they have in mind. Now, you know what some of them have in mind. They want everything.
Yeah.
They want to destroy Iraq. They want to destroy its forces. They want to kill Saddam Hussein, blah, blah, blah. But they don't tell you what we do after this attack. Are we going to stay in occupation of Iraq? Are we going to put a shogun in Baghdad? Are we going to walk away? Are we not going to go to Baghdad? Are we just going to take Kuwait and stop? Or are we going to get those 7 divisions in the northern part of Iraq? Nobody's talking about
No problem winning the peace.
Yeah.
and the Arabs, and eventually the Arabs have to play a big role.
Well,
or because we just can't do it.
problem.
Yeah.
But we have got to sometime decide, and now's the time to talk about, you know, you just used an expression that's wonderful, I've not used it before, the winning the peace. I'm going to weave it into my speeches right now. Winning the peace is, we're not thinking about winning the peace.
That's right.
We're thinking about winning the war, not the peace.
It was, I think I heard that from Nixon, didn't I, or somebody?
Oh, yeah, that's an old expression.
Yeah.
I'd never linked the two. What a great way to put it. That is my major problem with this problem, is that I'm afraid that a war is going to put us in a worse position to win the peace than not waging war. It's not the war that bothers me. It's what does it do for you in the Arab world? It's going to polarize the hell out of the Arab world. There are a lot of people there that don't like us now, but wait till we've killed 200,000 or 300,000 Iraqis and see how they like us.
And boy, they don't forget, and they tend to fight when they polarize.
Well, I don't know. You know, Iraq may fall under very quickly. I'm not sure this war will take as long as everybody says. I would hope, when I laid out a strategy that I would support for war, I think if you could force that bastard out of Kuwait, that these other problems are going to just solve themselves. If we raise this country bombing and get him out of Kuwait, he isn't going to be a nuclear power, he isn't going to be a military power, he isn't going to do anything. But we're going to be through in a lot of the Arab world. That's the problem.
Yeah. And that's a military strategy you're talking about there.
Yeah, I was just talking about the
driving
military. Once you had made the decision to engage, then how do you do it?
Drive him out of Kuwait.
Yeah. I think you defeat the forces in the northern border of Kuwait and the southern border of Iraq, and you isolate Kuwait until they're forced out, and you occupy Kuwait. And this all accompanies an intense bombing campaign, and then you reassess. You see where you are. You see what you want to do then. But one of the problems this country has is that once we lay down an objective, we can never change it.
Yeah.
Because politicians will be embarrassed. Now, they do get changed, like they did in Vietnam. But they get changed with so much trauma.
Yeah.
And you have to get rid of your politicians and get a new set in there before you can change it. And the country's got to express its will before you can get anything changed. What a hell of a way to do business. I think that's the biggest thing that Bush has made. He put out too many objectives too early in the game. The first objective should have been to defend Saudi Arabia and let it go at that and see what happens. And once we succeeded in doing that, say, okay, now we've done that, now what do we want to do next? But he laid everything down the first 24 hours.
Now every time he says anything that retreats from that, he's criticized.
Roasted.
Yeah. He's lost either way.
You know, even if he decided in his own mind it was a good idea to change it, how the hell would he change it?
He needs flexibility, but he can't have it. Yeah. I know you've got a lot of other